Welcome to the Daily Boogie.
Fantastic stuff. Another fine edition of the Weekly Stelter. What do we got next? Let's do a little bit of Pennsylvania Postgame. Let me throw this article up for y'all. New York Times, ladies and gentlemen. Pennsylvania special election results. Lamb wins 18th congressional district. 0.2%. Very close indeed. A lot was riding on it. Obviously, everybody knew that a Democrat win would lead into the kinds of conversations we're seeing now on the mainstream media, but that's fine. You've got to let people have their time. And it was an upset. I believe going into the election, the Democrat lad, by internal polls, I picked up somewhere that he was up by 5 points. The dark and disturbing Trump rally perhaps managed to drag a few mindless zombie Trump supporters who are just waiting for their opportunity to lynch the press over the line. If you look at the map here, all of these little districts, all around the Pittsburgh area, basically, like in the suburbs, like little suburbs of Pittsburgh, outer-lying suburbs of Pittsburgh up the top here. Right? It's a very, very, very tight grouping of blue, and all the rest is red. I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but if you're dealing with, what are we dealing with here? About 700 votes. There's obviously going to be calls for recounts. I mean, that's prudent when an election is so tight. 700 votes. And just for our Democrat friends in the House, I noticed Philly's joined us. Thanks for joining us, Philly. You are indeed an absolute machine. I'm not missing your comments. I'm enjoying them, as always. See, when it comes to, when people talk about rigging, see, a former Prime Minister of Australia once said, politics is, it's less about, convincing people, and it's more about maths. It's a maths game. So, and again, put your shiny tinfoil hat on, and I'm not saying anything was rigged or anything like that, but I'm just going to put to you, when people think of rigging, the imagery is that, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people were brought in on buses and voted multiple times. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. If you're dealing with 700 votes, right, and you look at all of these districts, now look at the kinds of, like, there's so many in there, you can't even see them on the screen, they're so small. So if you look, like 288 to 109, 377 to 170, 270 to 69, 387 to 102, 346 to 101, 242 to 101. We've nearly made up the 700 votes in that half a dozen tiny little districts there. So what you're talking about, you don't need thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people to vote illegally. All you need is a handful of people scattered across certain areas. 10, 15 votes in each of these tiny little precincts, one way, will swing the entire election for the rest of the district. Just handfuls of votes. This is something we've known in Australia for a long time, because we would call precincts booths here, and you need the object, if you're trying to win an election, is not so much the overall vote. You're trying to flip specific booths, because the booths are little suburbs and little areas like a precinct, right? So you have the bigger area, pardon me, which is the seat. And then within the seat, you have the little booths that make it up. And the best indication for whether or not you can flip a seat is by how many booths you can win. Right? So those numbers are really small. Like you saw there, it was like 380 to 120. So if you get an extra 100 people to vote in this one suburb, and you can times that by 10, bang, you've got 1,000 votes up your sleeve and you win by 800. Right? Philly, is that how Trump won? So I just found that interesting, that map. That really says a lot to me. Like, all of these urban areas. And that's something that Trump's going to have to address. Like, obviously, he won this area, I think it was reported by about 20% in the presidential election. And again, that probably says a lot about Hillary Clinton as well. Like, just what an absolutely abhorrent, unelectable candidate she was. And we'll get to Hillary's comedy tour later on in the show. But, you know, all of these blue areas just couldn't even manage to vote for Clinton. I've also got this from Ballotpedia. Touchy-feely Tim Murphy. When he ran just in 2016, they didn't even put up a candidate to go against him. That's how bad it was for the Dems in 2016. They couldn't even field an opponent. Here's the other thing. He got 293,000 votes on his own. In this special election, the Republicans couldn't even halve that number. Couldn't even halve that turnout for Rick Saccone. So what does that tell you? And it got me thinking, congratulations to Conor Lamb, but obviously there's more stuff to be nutted out in the courts. There's going to be a recount, and, numbers can vary in recounts. We saw Jill Stein in the presidential election call for a recount for Wisconsin, I believe, and it didn't turn out the way she wanted it to. In fact, it improved for Trump markedly, if I'm not mistaken. So who knows? There was also the issue of the local Supreme Court in regards to gerrymandering. That'll have to be investigated. But I don't know if it's worth spending the political capital for the Democrats taking this thing to the Supreme Court, knowing that, the district is essentially going to be extinct by January next year. They might see it as a lost cause, not worth the trouble. So they might just let it fly and not push too hard. They'll obviously have a recount and see, what comes of that. But whether or not it's worth pursuing to the highest levels, I doubt it. I doubt it. So wanted to take a little look at the young lamb, pun intended. Pennsylvania's closely watched 18th Congressional District Special Election is Tuesday. Here's what you need to know. Now, this is beforehand, because I always like to go back and see what people were saying before the election after it. Let's have a little listen to Connor.
It's all of organized labor, it's the pensions of many of our labor unions, and it's also things like Social Security and Medicare that apply to every American. People have paid into these programs over the course of a lifetime. I do not believe, as Paul Ryan does, that these are entitlements or another form of welfare. See that?
Okay, he's obviously very presentable. He's well spoken. Where is he? Okay, a little bit of quick bio. Lamb, a former Marine and federal prosecutor, is a moderate Democrat, though he's running primarily on issues including labour and fighting the opioid epidemic. And the opioid epidemic struck a chord with me, because I remember whenever anybody, almost 6 months ago would talk about the opioid epidemic, they'd be labelled as some kind of conspiracy theorist. You know, one of those fringe lunatics who's anti-pharma and so on. He's been pressed about his stance on abortion. As a Catholic, Lamb said he opposes abortion personally throughout the campaign, though he is not suggesting he would vote for anti-abortion legislation. No conscience vote then. Lamb said he would not describe himself as pro-life because he believes the term is political. Yes, can someone please tell Conor that he is now a politician? That's a great way to dodge it too. I'm not pro-life. I don't like the term pro-life. That's too political for my tastes. Oh, okay. You get a pass. And I think about other politicians who are anti-abortion and call themselves pro-life, and they're the most evil thing walking around in Washington. You're misogynist. You're anti-reproduction rights. You're a horrible, disgusting politician. Evil, evil, evil. A lot of Dems hate the military. They definitely don't like white prosecutors, you know, in the system of oppression known as the federal court system, prosecuting people of colour, throwing them in jail. Imagine how easy it would be to write the Democrat narrative for a Republican with this kind of bio. Former Marine, federal prosecutor, anti-abortion. If he was a Republican, if I'm the Democrat spin machine, if I'm writing Democrat flyers and whatnot, this would be a piece of cake. It writes itself. Anti-abortion, can't be trusted. Anti-reproductive rights, bigot, living in the past. Wants to ban abortions. Former Marine. You know, he's bloodthirsty. He's a warmonger. Federal prosecutor. How many black people has he thrown in prison? On and on it would go. But he's a Democrat, so it's like, whew, straight through. Hey, at least he's not Donald Trump, right? But we are talking about a new Democrat strategy here. And you know what? You've got to give credit where it's due. It's very intelligent. We've been wondering how the Democrats will re-engage with the public. Clearly, the leadership of the Democrat Party, when we're talking Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Maxine Waters, they have gone way too far. You can call it way too far to the left. They're detached. They don't understand their voters. With the election of Donald Trump, perhaps some people in the Democrat Party more locally, you know, at state level, started to recognize, okay, we have to divorce ourselves from the Washington leadership. Philly says Conor did a great job. Of course, he did. Of course he did. Did an incredible job. It was a big victory for him. No one's denying that. So is this the new Democrat way to win back some of these seats? If you want to put your shiny tinfoil hat on, here's a little thought for you. If you are part of the Washington establishment on the Republican side or the Democrat side, Donald Trump, if take this at face value, right? I'm just proposing an idea to you, a thought bubble, if you will. Donald Trump represents an existential threat to you. Through the campaign, he's like, we are taking down the establishment. Republican or Democrat, drain the swamp, right? Now, what would be the best way to ensure that you can put up a big roadblock to Donald Trump and protect yourself? Cover your ass, save yourself. If you're on the Republican side, where possible, remember this, I'm not suggesting that Rick Saccone was a necessarily bad candidate, although the GOP themselves have come out and said as much. And there was no primary for this election. They were selected, Rick Saccone was selected by committee. If you were colluding with the establishment of the Democrat side in the uniparty, what's been recently referred to as, the top brass of the Republicans, the top brass of the Democrats, you might, if you were seeking to save yourself and stop Donald Trump from bringing in his own people, which pose an existential threat to your existence, obviously, you would put up a candidate that was less likely to win and allow a more competent, polished Democrat to move against them, to run against them, and make sure that that Democrat candidate has a lot of shared values, the kind of values that Trump voters tip their hat to. Next thing you know, no more threat. Nullified. So, just an interesting thought bubble. I thought anyway. Let's go to the sleepy son of a bitch, Chuck Todd, for his take on it.
You're the vote counter. You have called this race, so we don't need you, AP. And you helped us, of course, call it as well. But what do you take away from this race? We've heard wake-up call, warning signs. I mean, if you need wake-up calls, you've been hitting the snooze bar, because this is like the 18th wake-up call in the last year.
Chuck, a Democrat winning a district that Trump carried by 20 points is 7 or 8 beer goggles ugly for the Republican Party. There's no doubt about it. And yet, at the same time, Democrats did something.
Tamara says, in order to win, they have to say they stand for conservative beliefs to get votes. Yes. And I noticed a couple of other comments there. Colleen, yes, agrees. Green Rabbit, yes. Aaron, don't apologise for your bad attitude. That's why we love you.
Smart here. They largely stayed off the Pittsburgh airwaves as a national party. And that was completely unlike what they did in Georgia 6, where John Ossoff lost. It allowed Conor Lamb to run his own campaign and credibly present himself to voters as someone who was not beholden to either party. And that
Divorced himself from the Democrat Party brand, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. No overbearing Democrat advertising, symbolism, messaging. No, this is all about Conor Lamb. Right? Not Democrat Party, not DNC, Conor Lamb. Different approach. Very clever.
That's what helped him win this race.
What does this race look like when there's 434 of them out there? And the reason I ask this is this way. Republicans threw everything at this race at the last second to try to rescue this campaign. My guess is, had Saccone been in the shape that he was, and this were before a November election, they would have just moved on to another race, and Saccone loses by 5 or 6, and they don't bother. But that's my sense of this. What does this race look like without it being the only race on the ticket?
Well, you're right. There are 100 districts that Republicans hold that are less Republican than this one. And yet, not all of them are going to be competitive in the fall. Conor Lamb was a uniquely strong candidate. His life story resonated with the district. He was a young Marine and prosecutor. Republicans aren't going to have that problem of running against basically a perfect candidate everywhere. So their only strategy, their only hope for winning, for holding on to their House majority, is to disqualify their Democratic opponent with opposition research. And
the only hope that the Republicans have of winning, of holding on to their majority, is by muckraking. Is Fusion GPS still available, ladies and gentlemen? Can somebody get Christopher Steele on the line? Can somebody get hold of an Oppo research company for me? Yes, let's go down that path. That is the only way. Look, he's very serious. That's the only possible way. Oppo research. And then when the Republicans engage in mass smear campaigns, then everybody will just slink off into the night and it won't be an issue anymore.
Make them unacceptable. It's going to be a scorched earth fall campaign.
Scorched earth.
And Democrats now take away from this, which is, and they've been saying this, they feel as if they want to find more candidates that fit the district. I've seen this movie before. It was 2006. It worked, but it does create governing problems down the road.
It absolutely does. And Look, Conor Lamb could be in Congress for a while because the redrawn Pennsylvania map gives him a district that's actually much better, much more friendly to Democrats than the one that he apparently just won. But that's the nature of a party with no clear leader. It's a big advantage when you're out of power because the face of your party can be every single candidate running in every state and district who can tailor a message perfectly to that district. But when you're actually in power, it becomes much more difficult because you've got tough decisions to make on wedge issues like guns, trade, you name it.
Hey there.
There you go. Very special treat, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to double up on Don. Get ready to suck your face inwards. Get ready to wince. Get ready to have tears flowing from your eyes as we bite into a little bit of Don's lemon.
It must have been a tough day to work in this White House. A White House that's making excuses for the president's candidate losing a major bellwether election last night. While a source tells CNN President Trump has been complaining about his own handpicked cabinet and wants to purge what he calls the dead weight. So it's no wonder multiple...
You have to do it in air quotes, dead weight. Doubled on. You know, doubling up on Donnie. Just quickly, can we address this? We're going to get to Rex Tillerson shortly, but, you know, now it's about purging and stuff. Some of us have been saying since the day Donald Trump got elected, right? There's a clear system that Donald Trump uses. In the first year, when he comes into a company, takes over a company, he sits back, he, sees how it operates. He may make some changes here and there, but he generally takes stock, see who's competent, see who isn't. And then in the second year, he burns everyone. The other thing Donald Trump does is he brings people in for specific jobs. You come in, you complete your task. When your task is done, you move out because your specialty is not the new task. There's a new task to be performed now, and your specialty is not applicable to it. So thanks for your service. Off you go. For some reason now, all of a sudden, the mainstream media seem to believe that getting a job in the White House is like a job for life. Like, you can't move anybody on. And sure, there's a high turnover rate, but it's not so high when you consider Donald Trump's background in business. There's always a high turnover rate in White House jobs. There has been for every president beforehand. Trump's is definitely higher, but again, it's not unexpected, I wouldn't have thought, if you're being objective and reasonable. Mr. Lemon?
Staffers tell CNN they're on edge. Not sure who will still have a job tomorrow.
Oh, the poor darlings.
One White House official is telling Axios, quote, this is the most toxic working environment on the planet.
Toxic.
Well, tonight, whether you work for this administration or whether you're a Republican up for election come November, are you more than a little worried about your job prospects? Politics right now in this country, like it or not, is about one man. People have strong feelings about him. You may have noticed that. And right now, that man, our president, wants to get rid of the very people he chose.
Kimmy says you're the first to pointed that out.
With people
it's so
who
obvious
will
now
not
that I say it like
him.
that. Oh, I don't know if I'm the first. I'm sure a lot of people have been able to grasp this very highly complicated concept. Most of them are not at CNN, I assume, obviously, but we'll carry on with Don.
Who will let, you've heard it before, Trump be Trump. Clearly that means between now and November's elections, he is definitely not going to change. Harry Truman famously had a sign on his desk, and it said, the buck stops here. But it seems this president doesn't realize that.
That's incredibly ironic for Harry Truman, considering what he did to the economy. The buck stops here, but anyway.
He constantly fails to take the blame for the chaos he himself is creating.
Oh, I was your first, Kimmy.
For the race in Pennsylvania that should never have been lost by a Republican, or the one in Alabama that should never have been won by a Democrat. The cabinet reflects the president's choices, and the post-election spin doesn't deflect from an embarrassing defeat. Voters are sending a message, and if the president isn't hearing it, a whole lot of other people are. Let's get to CNN's political analyst Ryan Lizza, April Ryan, and former Congressman David Jolly. Good evening to all of you. Glad
April's
to have
back
you
again.
on. Hi, Ryan. You first.
Does April even sleep? It's time for April. Oh. It was very dark. They were the voters of Pennsylvania were responding to the dark and racist imagery of the robot routine that Donald Trump was engaging in. He was scaring everyone. I mean, look how horrible this is.
The United States of America, thank you very much.
That's easy. See, that's easy.
What's not easy, though? Explaining this, malarkey.
All the chaos coming out
The
of
chaos.
this Trump White House. And then we have a red district.
We're going to play the Don Lemon drinking game. Every time the word chaos gets mentioned, have a drink.
We have all the chaos coming out of this Trump White House. And then we have a red district turning blue last night, and the president doesn't seem to think it has anything to do with him.
Well, what you said in your intro is right, Don. These midterm elections and re-election campaigns are always referenda on the incumbent president. And so this entire year, and we're in an election year, is going to be about one person, and that's Donald Trump. And that, you know, look, the election in Pennsylvania, there.
Okay. It's all about Donald Trump. Now, we just heard on MSNBC the young lad saying how Conor Lamb managed to win literally by divorcing himself from the Democrat brand. Okay? They didn't even play radios in, was it the Pittsburgh area? The radio commercials. Conor Lamb won because he had nothing to do with the Democrats.
Campaign and credibly present himself to voters as someone, and that was. Yet at the same time, Democrats did something smart here. They largely stayed off the Pittsburgh airwaves as a national party. And that was completely unlike what they did in Georgia 6, where John Ossoff lost. It allowed Conor Lamb to run his own campaign and credibly present himself to voters as someone who was not beholden to either party. And that's what helped him win this race.
Okay, so he's not beholden to either party. That's what helped him win this race. Talking head on Don Lemon. Who's to blame for all this?
Well, what you said in your intro is right, Don. These midterm elections and re-election campaigns are always referenda on the incumbent president. And so this entire year, and we're in an election year, is going to be about one.
These special elections and midterm elections are always, ladies and gentlemen, not sometimes, not most of the time, not rarely, not seldom, always a referendum on the incumbent president. Let me just throw this up for the people with short memories. Superman Barack Obama lost 1,000 seats in state legislators, governors' mansions, and Congress during his 8-year term. It's always a referendum on the incumbent. Let's carry on.
Person.
Yeah, Philly before was saying, you know, they've lost, the Republicans have lost, what was it, 50 since Donald Trump's election? It's like, yeah, it's easy to bounce back when you're coming from such a low mark. Like when you're coming from such a low level, it's easy to win back a few of these long-time Democrat posts. It really is. Let's carry on.
And that's Donald Trump. And that, you know, look, the election in Pennsylvania, there were a lot of local issues that this Democratic candidate campaigned on. because it is a more conservative district. But at the end of the day, Trump is what is driving the sort of historic special election turnout for Democrats. He's driving some Republicans in the suburbs away from the Republican Party, and he's driving obviously increased turnout on the Democratic side. And he's also driving a lot of Republicans out of Congress. And I think that the thing to watch for in the next few days is who else retires. There's already been 36 Republicans who have announced their retirement this cycle.
Ben K. Veritas, thanks for
you're
joining
on
us.
the cusp of, should I stay, should I go? You see a race like the one in Pennsylvania.
Tamara says, you're being too logical. Apologies for that. It's my privilege. It's my mansplaining. It's my mansplaining kicking in again. Sorry. Let's carry on.
Day, and that might push you to the exits.
April, you're there most days.
Most days.
In the briefing room, around the White House. That's your perch. So the most toxic working environment ever, or in the
Toxic.
country. I mean, and everyone's spinning around this president, making excuses. Does he know that he is the cause of this chaos?
Chaos. Ding, 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 ding.
Do they know?
Well, let me say this. Inside they know it's manic.
It's like Conor Lamb won an election where he was up by 5 points in the polls prior to the election. Okay. And now the White House is spinning out of control, and it's all Donald Trump's fault, and it's just fucking chaos. These elections are always a referendum on the incumbent president. How did Conor Lamb win? By having nothing to do with the Democrat Party whatsoever. This proves that people are ready to march right back to the snuggly, warm bosom of the Democrat Party. And yes, we can add toxic in there, absolutely. People are ready once again to be embraced by the loving, harmonious, empathetic, and compassionate Democrat Party. As long as you don't have anything to do with them. Because we need to rescue the White House from this washing machine style president who's just spinning out of control. It's chaos, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, he's firing people. There's a purge. This is the most toxic White House. This is the most toxic work environment in the country. Let's carry on.
Inside they know that something's not right, but the president is someone who never loses. He never sees it as it's his problem. We talked about this early on, the manic pace, and it's now exposing itself. What's done in the dark is coming to the light.
Yes.
And at issue, Don, is the fact that this president wants to shake up his administration. He's hearing from his friends. According to my sources, he's consulting and hearing from his friends, his loyalists, who are telling him you need to make cuts now and make major cuts now. Not just one, not just two, but get rid of people now.
Major
and then
cuts.
Bring in those who are loyal to you. I mean, I'm hearing their names I'm hearing like...
He's clearly a psychopath. He wants to bring in people into his inner circle as a president, perhaps one of the most besieged presidents that anybody can think of. He doesn't have many friends in Washington. I mean, his entire campaign was based on getting rid of them all. and this absolute lunatic, I mean, he wants to bring in people who are not going to stab him in the back. I mean, what? He's clearly lost his mind. Tom Chatelet, thanks for joining us. He's clearly lost his mind. To surround yourself in the inner circle with people who you can rely on and trust when the bullets start flying, ladies and gentlemen, when the hand grenades start hurling over the back fence. The absolute best way forward for Donald Trump right now is to take April's advice and to hire people who are not loyal. Bring in people who you dislike. Bring in people who you can't trust. That's what a good president does. Fantastic stuff. I love it.
Major names from various sectors who this president is looking at to replace certain people. I mean, people that he even brought in during the transition period. So this is real.
It's real.
This president is supposedly wanting to, according to sources, wanting to surround himself with those who are loyal and his friends, those who are loyal around him.
Wait, what an awful concept.
So it will not be someone who is a naysayer, per se, when he gets rid of the rest of the group that he wants to get rid of at this moment.
Green Rabbit says,
David
bring in your
Zeller, let me bring
enemies.
you in here because I want to know about your former colleagues
Green Rabbit's a future Democrat strategist right there.
in the GOP. Do you think any of them realize this? Do they see what's happening here?
Oh, sure. And they're terrified. They're absolutely terrified.
Everybody's there seems to be a recurring theme on CNN tonight, ladies and gentlemen. It seems everybody in government and everybody in the press is absolutely terrified. One may argue whether or not that is an agreeable situation for the rest of us, but I digress. Everybody's petrified. They're shitting themselves.
And Ryan is correct. You're going to see more retirements likely. In most states, filing deadlines are coming up in the next 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. And you're going to be seeing people begin to relook whether or not they're going to run for re-election. And it's for one very simple reason. It's Donald Trump.
Yep.
Listen, under Donald Trump,
Good.
every Republican in a congressional special election since he took office has underperformed.
Now this is some beautiful spinning right here. LA Child, thanks for joining us. Every Republican in a special election has underperformed.
Republicans like to say they won 5 or 6, they've only lost 1. Yes, but in every single one of those races, Republicans underperformed.
Winning is now losing. Remember in the Ossoff campaign, right? He was a sure thing. He was absolutely going to win. Before it was unironically, it's like we're living in the age of goldfish. Before the election, I forget the name. Silly of me to make the goldfish remark with that lead in, but I forget the name of the journalist. Actually, it was Sally Cohn. It was Sally Cohn. There you go. Pulled it out of the fire. Before the election, she came out and said, "This special election is absolutely a referendum on Donald Trump." And then when, I believe it was Karen Handel that beat John Ossoff, if I'm not mistaken, when Handel won, she came out the next day, literally, and said, this election had absolutely nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's like, I'm not even joking. So everyone's terrified. Sure, the Republicans have won 5 and lost 1, but in those 5 wins, they really lost. They underperformed. And that's got to be reassuring to Democrats that the Republicans can underperform and still win. Conor Lamb pulls out the win of the century, wins by literally 700 votes, 0.2 of 1%, and it is the greatest win of all time. It's the voters sending a message. The whole country hates Donald Trump. The Republicans are terrified of him. On the flip side, the Republicans win 5, lose 1, but even those 5 winners, they didn't really win because they underperformed. The real winners were the Democrat losers in those elections. Democrats overperform, win a seat by 0.2%. Republicans underperform, still win. And this is the voters sending a message that Donald Trump is evil and hated, and a blue wave is coming.
Last night, they underperformed by 20 points. Wow. There are at least 20 to 25 seats in the House right now held by Republicans that Hillary Clinton won. There's another 30 to 40 that are within 2 to 3 to 4 points. Every single one of those races is now in jeopardy, and it's why Republicans are more likely than not looking at a wipeout in November.
Wipeout.
I want to ask you this, Ryan, because the sources close to the White House says the GOP does not view the race as a referendum on Trump, but rather Rick Saccone was a weak candidate. I mean, what do you think last night? Was it a referendum on this president, or
Of course
was it
it
on
was.
Saccone?
Listen
Look,
to
when
this.
you have a 20-point swing in less than 2 years, that is not because you had a weak candidate. And plus, what was the candidate's claim to fame? He said he
Tamara says, how sad it is to lose to an underperforming candidate. Must sting. I tend to agree. Welcome, liberal translations.
was Trump before Trump. So he himself was trying to portray himself like.
Liberal translations, everyone is very pleased that you have arrived here. If you can make sense of this for us, please put your skills into use.
Like the president. The president is the dominant factor in our politics. He
Yes.
is what everything revolves around.
Everything.
And midterm elections, look, this was a special election, so it's a little bit different, but midterm elections are always a statement about the president. They're always a referendum
Always.
on the president. And, you know, most presidents.
So those five or six that the panelist before this guy literally a minute ago referred to that the Republicans won but underperformed, they were also a referendum on the president. But remember, it doesn't matter that the Republicans won those seats because they they underperformed whilst doing it. They phoned it in, so it doesn't count. Do-overs.
Lose, obviously, in their first midterm. But what we're looking at with these numbers in these special elections is a wave forming out there. And, you know, the last thing that was said there about the margin of the swing is much, much more important than who wins or loses. I mean, if every House race in the country swung 20 points towards the Democrats, obviously not every Democrat would necessarily win, but you would have a wipeout on the Republican side, and obviously the Democrats would take over. So, yeah, look, when you lose an election, you got to come out and you got to have some line, you got to have some spin. If you're the White House, you say, oh, it wasn't about the president, it was all local thing, it was a terrible candidate. And Trump has a history of saying, you know, it was the candidate's fault, not his. But these races are about Trump. Everything in American politics revolves around Trump. I mean, everything in American culture these days revolves around President Trump.
Everything in American culture revolves around Trump. Like the bastion of culture that is Hollywood, for example. They can't stop talking about him. They must be big Trump fans. Thanks for that, Don. Don Lemon, ladies and gentlemen, and his wacky crew.